Coming to you at 320 kilobits per second from an underground bunker deep below the streets of Soma, smack dab in the heart of San Francisco. It's the rock and roll coup d'etat with Eddie Winters.
Oh, yes, baby. My name's Eddie Winters, and I am very excited about our next guest. He is a virtuoso guitar player who has spent his entire life dedicated to learning and mastering the work of guitarist Jimmy Page of Led Zeppelin. His name is Jimmy Sakurai, and he's going to be joined with his friend Ami Shimada, who is going to be helping doing the Japanese translations. Jimmy, welcome to the program.
Thank you so much.
First, you're going to be playing a show in Tarzana, California, coming up at the end of March 30th at Petie's place. And you're going to be performing with Frankie Banali of Quiet Riot in your band, Mr. Jimmy. What can you tell us about this show?
Okay.
What have you got planned for us?
Okay, I have a show with Frankie Banali, band Mr. Jimmy, at Saturday's Petie show. I have a show with How the West Was One show.
Right.
So Jimmy-san saying what he plans is that the recreation or revival of the 72 show that was done in Long Beach.
でそれはちょうどレッド・ゼッペリンが今月その同じアルバムの
So this is also as an anniversary for Jimmy Page releasing his new album or remaster.
10年以上前に発売されてるやつもののリマスター。
Remaster of the album that was released over 10 years ago.
How the West Was Won?
Yes,
Yes.
right.
So I wanted to talk about Frankie Banali of Quiet Riot. You've been friends with Frankie for years. How did you meet Frankie, and how did you start playing the music of Led Zeppelin together?
僕とフランキーはもう10年前ですね。もう10年も前だね。
Frankie was also a big fan of Led Zeppelin, and it was over 10 years ago when Jimmy-san and Frankie started talking, but it was because Frankie was watching Jimmy-san on YouTube, and they started talking. But then about 4 years ago, since Jimmy-san moved to LA, their distance got much closer, and they were able to actually meet and collaborate.
Going back a few years, when you were growing up in Japan, do you remember the first time you heard Led Zeppelin's music, and what impact did it have on you?
僕が最初にゼッペリンを聴いたのは、15歳の時だったと思うんですよね。
Jimmy-san, the first time he listened to Led Zeppelin when he was 15, it was the year after he started playing guitar. He said he couldn't really understand or grasp why it's so good. He didn't understand because he said his musical skill or talent or ability wasn't mature enough. But after 3 years, when he was 17, his classmates who had their own band that was doing the tribute band of Led Zeppelin, they asked Jimmy-san to join to play the guitar. And so he was 17. He grew some musical skills by playing guitar. By then, he was able to understand oh, wow, this is amazing. Led Zeppelin's amazing.
Right.
And when he heard the song Remain the Same, that was the moment when he was like, oh, I will play exactly like this in the future for sure, no matter what.
That is great.
That band still is active, and Jimmy-san still connected to them even now.
でそのバンドはね、ライブバージョン、ライブをするスタジオ版とライブ版とあるんだ。
Jimmy-san's passion is to play the live version instead of the studio version, and Jimmy-san's really into how Jimmy Page is able to arrange and play in the live version.
Right.
He got the most. He was shocked by how Jimmy Page is able to play with a single guitar, as if it's done with multi-track, as in studio version. And Jimmy-san what Jimmy-san trying to do is that.
So at what point did you decide that you were going to spend and dedicate your life to channeling the work of Jimmy Page?
それはね、やっぱり10代、17からステップに始めて、で20代もうずっとそれからステップにやってる。
Okay, so when he started playing guitar, he was a big fan of Led Zeppelin, but he also was listening to other bands and different kind of music. But then he said he always went back to Led Zeppelin, and after he became 30, he became able to play blues, and actually expressing his emotions, like his soul into it. And since then, he says there's nothing else to do. He just wants to do this.
Right. Jimmy-san, what has been the most challenging part of your work channeling Jimmy Page?
Okay. ジミー・ペイジはそのギター弾くだけではなくってね。
What's great about Jimmy Page is that not only he's just playing the guitar, but his ability to express his passion and emotions and convey that to the audience very in a good way, like successful way, and how he moves, his like position, and how he moves his arms and legs and all that things included. So Jimmy-san he says he can, I mean, anyone can play the guitar, but to express the way Jimmy Page was doing is the hardest, to be able to really like show that passion and then convey that to the audience.
Yes. Now, Jimmy, you've had the distinct honor of playing in front of Jimmy Page, playing his music in front of him. Did you feel a certain pressure to perform? What was that experience like for you?
もうまず彼が僕のショーを見たいって言ってくれたことにもうまずものすごくその光栄。
Jimmy-san was already honored to hear that Jimmy Page wants to come to see his show, but when Jimmy Page actually walked into the venue that day, Jimmy Page came straight to Jimmy-san and bowed really deeply and shook hands. And then it was such a small venue, so Jimmy-san could actually see where Jimmy Page is looking at, staring at, and he says Jimmy Page was looking directly at Jimmy-san playing. And so Jimmy-san felt kind of pressure to show that, you know, Jimmy-san, he is doing the right way. He didn't want to do wrong because this is Jimmy Page's music. This is his creation. So he wanted to show that Jimmy-san show that he's doing right. And Jimmy Page was actually like moving to the rhythm as like other audience was doing, and he was just smiling the whole time, having fun. And Jimmy-san says this was he can't really express how amazing it was.
When you watch that video and you see yourself playing in front of Jimmy Page, do you get an emotional reaction? How does it make you feel?
いやもうそれはものすごく僕も嬉しかったし、僕がどの曲だったかな、始まった時にジミーがわ
So in the video there is there was a moment where Jimmy Page is looking at other audience as if he's saying like, "Oh, look, like hear this, listen to this. This is the song I made. This is the music I made." And so Jimmy-san felt like he's just portraying or the embodiment. He was the embodiment of his Jimmy Page's creation, and Jimmy-san felt so proud, and it was as if Jimmy Page was giving a presentation using Jimmy-san.
彼は、そのショー終わってからね、雑誌のインタビューに答えてるんだけど、そのショーの後に。
Okay, there was an interview that Jimmy Page did after watching Jimmy-san's show, and since Jimmy-san showed his long solo part that was like exactly the same as Jimmy Page used to do, and Jimmy Page said in the interview that really reminded him of how he used to be back then, trying to create something new. And yeah, he basically said Jimmy-san's performance made him go back in time when he was in that time.
What was the deciding factor for Jimmy-san to come to America?
それって決めた要因は
残念ながら日本ではね、僕がそのジミー・ペイジが僕のショーを見に来てくれる。
So it's such a big news that Jimmy Page actually came to see his performance in Japan, but unfortunately, Japanese media didn't really cover that at all, except for this one newspaper company, Asahi Shimbun.
Right.
And so that made Jimmy-san realize Japanese music community, tribute bands are not considered as highly as here in America. So Jimmy-san wanted to come here to America and bring that culture, American way, back to Japan.
So when you came to America, you began work with the group, the tribute act Led Zeppelin again, and you started playing to American audiences. What was the experience like first coming here and playing these shows to American audiences? What was the response like?
確かに、それまでのレッド・ゼッパゲンはね、スタジオ版のカバーをするだけのバンドだったの。
So when Jimmy-san joined Led Zeppelin again, they were only doing the studio version, but Jimmy-san wanted to do the live version, and so he asked the other members, and other members were respectful enough to agree to Jimmy-san. And once they started the live version, he says the demographic of the audience changed from people who were just, who doesn't care about the music as long as the music is there and drinking and partying, to the audience who are really the real Led Zeppelin fans. And so Jimmy-san really wants to play the live version and the real Led Zeppelin, and that he wants to do. So that was a big event and honor.
So very recently, you've performed and toured with the Jason Bonham Led Zeppelin experience. And can you share with us, how did you meet Jason Bonham, and what is that? What has that been like for you?
確かにね、もう今からそうだな、やっぱ10年近く前にジェイソンとナムショーで一回会ったこと。
So the first time they talked was over 10 years ago. They met at the show, and they briefly talked. And
Nam show.
Nam show. Nam show. That was the show they met. They briefly only talked, but then last summer. Because they talked because Jason had watched Jimmy-san on YouTube before, but last summer, Jason contacted Jimmy-san to audition for him, and so Jimmy-san went to the audition, but it turns out that there was only Jimmy-san at the audition, so basically Jimmy-san performed for him, and that's how they started collaborating.
What is it like to perform the very music that you've spent your entire life channeling and studying and playing that music with the son of John Bonham?
もちろんね、そのレジェンドだからね、ドラマのレジェンド、ジョン・ボーナムの息子がそこにいて、
So Jason, since he's the son of the legend John Bonham, he just knows about his father so well, and he also actually played with Jimmy Page. So now that Jimmy-san's playing the part that Jimmy Page played, this is the most honorable thing he says he can have. And Jason is such a talented person, and he has the really musical. He has such a musical talent. So Jimmy-san always gets like very so much of a stimulus and influence from Jason.
多くの人がね、多くのセッペリンのジョン・ボーナムのファンがジェイソンのことをね、お父さんと違うって言ってるのは僕も見てるんだけど。
A lot of Led Zeppelin fans says Jason is different from his father in a way that they play, but Jason is really looking up to how John Bonham was playing in each show, how differently the father was playing, and Jason is in his own way trying to do his best, not necessarily just copying or imitating, but then that influenced Jimmy-san as well. Jimmy-san now wants to really find the best with Jason, not necessarily just copying or trying to imitate, but really find something new by collaborating with Jason.
Do you have plans to continue to perform with Jason Bonham?
If you like.
Right. There is a documentary that is in the works on your life and your story. Could you tell us a little bit about this documentary and when it's going to be released?
So it's been 3 years since the director started filming, but it's been taking longer because because Jimmy-san has been going through so many different things that he didn't even expect, like quitting the band and starting a new band and then joining to play with Jason in such an eventful thing. So that's why the filming is still ongoing. But it's supposed to be released in this year, by this end of this year. And the content is like how Jimmy-san started playing the guitar back in Japan in the snowy city of Niigata, countryside of Japan. And then he went to Tokyo to play, and then to America. It's basically a whole journey of Jimmy-san. And also the movie includes a lot of interviews of his old friends in Japan.
あとは衣装を作ってくれる、あと機材、そのこだわり、すべてのこだわりがあって、セッペリンの音楽ができるジミー・ペイジがやれるんだけど、ただ練習するだけで。
The documentary also features everyone who supports Jimmy-san, such as like costume makers and the person who helps with the equipment, and everyone basically who supports Jimmy-san, because Jimmy-san can't just play the guitar and be who he is right now. So the documentary shows like everyone who supports Jimmy-san, I mean, in all way possible.
So Jimmy-san, after this performance here at Petie's at the end of the month, with Frankie Banali performing the How the West Was Won concert, what have you got planned for us in the future?
次は東京でね、5月に東京で2本、またフランキーとアメリカのメンバーを連れて東京でショーをやって。
So Mr. Jimmy is having shows in Japan this May, and then after he comes back to LA, he goes to a tour with Jason to Australia, and then to the national tour of the U.S.
Summer tour
summer tour
with White Snake and
with White Snake and Paulina. For 2 months from June, he's having an American national tour.
That is great. I want to thank you so much, Mr. Jimmy Sakurai, for joining us on this program. It has been a wonderful experience.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. So that I appreciate it.
We're going to go see you in Tarzana, California, down at Petie's place with Frankie Banali and your band, the Mr. Jimmy Band. Again, thank you so much, Jimmy Sakurai and Amy. Thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you so much.
Great to meet you. Thank you.
There he is, Jimmy Sakurai, baby.